Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and as always, joined with two great guests today. Both of the guests that we have today are actually from Footballguys. We got Jeff Bell and Christian Williams, who are part of the Footballguys College Show, and we are going to look ahead at some Week 14 matchups and rankings. The theme for this week is cloudy backfields, and we are going to be talking about a bunch of them. We're looking at Rachaad White and Leonard Fournette and who the guy is in Tampa Bay. Has DeAndre Swift finally usurped his rollback from Jamal Williams to take the role as the Detroit Lions RB1? How about Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert? It looked like there was some clarity there, but after last week, who knows? Be sure to stick through to the very end of this week's episode of The Launchpad. Who is the New York Jets running back to start this week? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Christian, start us off here. Who is the Jets running back that you prefer for Week 14?
Zonovan Knight. Zonovan Knight has put together two fantastic performances. And this week, Michael Carter's back. Game script would push you that way, but I'm in on Zonovan this week.
Yeah, in game script, that's a tricky game to play, especially when we're looking at Ty Johnson, who has been siphoning the majority of the passing down work right now. We don't even know if that's going to be going Michael Carter's way, so it is definitely an interesting conversation to have. And Jeff, who do you prefer? Are you with Zonovan Knight as well, or Michael Carter, Ty Johnson? Do we maybe see James Robinson? I'm kidding. Of course not. Who is the running back to start this week?
I have Zonovan Knight highest in my rankings. I think he's a great fit for that wide zone scheme. He's a very explosive player. He doesn't mess around, gets upfield, and gains yardage. I think he's the most explosive of these Jets backs, and that's why he's played well. Buffalo's a tough matchup for them, though, I think, in the run game. And then when you are looking at this ambiguity, I think the only thing that really pushes you to starting a Jet this week is that 6 teams on a bye this week.
Yeah, that definitely muddies up the waters a little bit and makes us start getting a little bit desperate looking at some of these guys. So let's kind of talk through, because we did talk about game script a little bit. And, I don't want to try to project anything, but if we're looking at what Vegas has guessed this game to be, it's that the Bills are going to win kind of handily. So if they do fall from behind, do we expect the passing down work to go to Zonovan Knight, or does that maintain with Ty Johnson like we've seen the last couple of weeks, or do we see Michael Carter become that pass catching back? And I know we're going a little bit off script here, but Christian, why don't you start me off? Who do you think would absorb the majority of that passing down work if it gets to that point?
I think it's going to be a little bit of a split between Zonovan and Michael Carter. The main thing to take away from Zonovan's game is he's actually been pretty effective when he's been targeted. He's caught all of his targets over the last 2 weeks. And I think, like Jeff said, he's got that explosion that the teams are looking for. Michael Carter's coming back off of injury. I think maybe they tend to ease him back. And they actually, there's been the report that Zonovan will still have a prominent role. Now, whether that's just a rushing role or a pass catching work is still to be seen. But I think that Zonovan has done enough to stay on the field on crucial downs, which should push him there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in the same place. And, Carter, when he outside of that Breece Hall injury, those first couple of weeks, Carter was very involved in the passing game. He had averaged 40 yards per game, both of those receiving yards, both of those games. And I know Ty Johnson stepped forward a little bit. Ty Johnson is okay in spurts, but Ty Johnson is not going to be anything in your fantasy lineups, I don't believe. But I wouldn't, again, I'd hesitate to even play Carter off that injury. But I do like Knight and hammer it home. Knight.
All right, I'm with you guys. And sorry, I tried saying something there and my mic was muted. Just got a UPS delivery here and my dogs were going absolutely ballistic. So sorry about that. But anyway, want to welcome the audience into what is now episode 56 of The Launchpad. It's kind of crazy. The season is going by quick. We only have 3 episodes left after this week. Last week, I was joined with Andy Behrens and Dan Titus as we talked about some Week 13 matchups. And today I'm joined with 2 people that you're probably familiar with from the Footballguys channels here, Jeff Bell and Christian Williams. We are missing the third part of this group right here. Unfortunately, we can only do 2 guests at a time, but Kevin Coleman and these 2 gentlemen are doing the Footballguys College Show, which has been awesome. Highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already. If you're familiar with the Debbie Royale, what they used to do, pretty much the same show that we are now running on the Footballguys channel. So youtube.com/Footballguys. Be sure to check that out. Now, we're already talking about this Jets-Buffalo game, and I think that's a pretty fun game where, in the preseason, I don't think that there would have been any question about who's going to win this, but suddenly now the Jets are sitting at 7-5. Mike White has really revamped this offense a little bit. And I want to talk about the passing game here because Garrett Wilson has solidified himself as just a set and forget wide receiver. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if from here on through the end of the season, he's putting up top 10 numbers just about every single week. He looks like the absolute real deal. And we're seeing Mike White averaging 42 pass attempts per game since taking over as a starter. But I don't know if we've seen any sort of consistency from Corey Davis's and Ty Conklin and Elijah Moore's. So, Jeff, start us off here. Outside of Garrett Wilson, are there any pass catchers that you feel comfortable starting in this matchup?
I think comfortable is probably an aggressive word. I know Corey Davis missed some time this week. I think he was maybe sick. I don't know that there was an injury there, but when he's been available this year, he's on pace for 1,000-yard season. And I think he's the pretty clear second receiver there. I think where you run into some trouble with this passing attack is that they're not afraid to involve Braxton Berrios. They're not afraid to involve, the guy that everybody wants. Elijah Moore gets a little bit, and Denzel Mims is still getting some reps, and they're using multiple tight ends. They're using both Ty Conklin and CJ Uzama. So they're kind of going in a bunch of different directions there. And so I think that Davis is the clear second receiver in this offense. And I never really understood why. I don't know. Elijah Moore makes one play against the Bears in a blowout game, scores a touchdown, and everybody's right back in on Elijah Moore as being the guy. And that doesn't seem to be materializing this year. And so Davis would be the second option out of this offense, and probably the second offense option that you consider playing in the passing game would be Ty Conklin in here. But again, it's just a lot of hesitation on anybody but Garrett Wilson.
Victoria and I talked about this yesterday on the mailbag show, though. We keep seeing all of these, it's an Elijah Moore week tweets, and I'm just not seeing it. He went 2 for 7. He had 2 catches for 7 yards last week. That's not a guy that I think you can feel comfortable plugging in your lineup whatsoever. If you are starting Elijah Moore, you are just praying that he can rip off a big play because the usage just hasn't been there. So I agree with you. I think Ty Conklin is probably the best guy to have behind Corey Davis and Garrett Wilson. Same question over to you, though, Christian. Is there anybody outside of Garrett Wilson that piques your interest in this offense?
Yeah, I mean, riding the Corey Davis train a little bit, he played on 81% of snaps this last week. He was working back from injury the week before, and so it seemed like they eased him back in. He saw 3 targets that first time back, but 10 targets this last week. And I think the main thing to take away was the 2 crucial catches as the Jets were trying to come back against the Vikings. That stuff goes a long way in building trust with a newer quarterback. Obviously, Mike White has had experience with Corey Davis in the past, but I think when you're looking at, obviously, like you said, Garrett Wilson is the one, but I don't think there's any questioning who is the 2 at this point. And in a week full with 6 teams on bye, I think you can very easily convince yourself to start Corey Davis, at least in a flex position, and hope for wide receiver 2 numbers.
Yep, with you on that. So let's talk about the Bills a little bit. And Jeff, being the resident Bills fan on this show, I'm going to have you start us off here because looking at this backfield, it appears as if James White is maybe taking over, but you need a little bit more than one data point to really identify a trend, and that's all we're looking at. It's just out of nowhere last week, James White saw his largest snap share of the season, and simultaneously, Devin Singletary saw his lowest snap count of the season. So walk us through what's happening right here. I mean, are we already ready to just plug James Cook into our lineups as a potential RB2?
I mean, he had a great game against the Browns. And what's really happening right now, so that was 2 weeks ago, and then he was quiet against Detroit, and that kind of threw everybody off the scent a little bit. But Josh Allen has that elbow injury, and they're trying to work through that elbow injury. They're trying to do 2 things right now. They're trying to work through that elbow injury, and if you watch the Bills, Josh Allen's not his normal self, and he's short-arming throws. He's missing high because he's trying to put more into it than what he's really got right now. And so they're trying to get through that. Game script is part of it. I mean, New England was not competitive last week. And so I think game script was a big major factor. They were able to run the ball at will. The Patriots were sitting in too high. And that's really the other factor in this, is that because of Josh Allen's ability and the ability to attack downfield, you're getting a lot more teams that are sitting in that cover 2, sitting with 2 high safeties, and the Bills need to run the ball against that look. And so they've really focused down, and they've run it over the past couple weeks, trying to nurse that injury from Josh Allen, but establish that as well, and having that presence in that factor. So playing into it, I think it was a little bit game script dependent on James Cook's big game last week. I do think he's going to get more looks. Devin Singletary had lower snaps than what he had been running at, but his usage was still kind of the same. He still got about the same amount of attempts. So he was kind of right there where you would expect him to end up. I don't think they see either of these guys as a guy that can touch the ball 20 times in a game. And so that plays into it. And then Naeem Hines, that was the first time they really got him involved last week as well. And there's been a lot of frustration on everybody was like, oh, they're inserting Naeem Hines into that offense. He's going to take off. I think what that really does is allow them to play James Cook more, instead of worrying about burning the rookie out or worrying about having that passing factor and not having something to fall back on in the game. Naeem Hines gives them that safety blanket more or less and be able to build that more into their offense.
So I guess I'll just rephrase the question a little bit, and maybe, I'm trying to pry something out of here, but who would you prefer this week? Is it James Cook or Devin Singletary? Who do you have ahead in your rankings?
I have Singletary still ahead. I think Singletary is going to get the goal line work, and I don't think either really have enough out of the passing game to rely on them to kind of take that. I think the passing game is a little bit the same out of both of them. So I still have Singletary ahead, and I think that this being an important division matchup against the Jets, a team that beat them last time, I think they're going to rely a little bit heavier on that veteran presence.
Yeah. And I had it the same way too. And I did write about James Cook in my trending up section of this week's article. But I think this is a good conversation to have because people see one good week and they just go, all right, cool, let's plug James Cook into your lineup. And I don't know if it's time for that quite yet. He's a guy that you want to pick up and stash and see what can happen. But I'm with you. I think that you nailed that question, Jeff. Christian, what do you have to add? Is there anything about this backfield that you want to point out?
Well, I think the one thing we've seen 1 week of it now where James Cook did, get close to Singletary snaps. Now he didn't usurp him entirely.
1%.
Obviously, yeah, exactly.
1%.
Very, very close. So I think if this is the week that he does usurp him and he does, significantly outsnap him, I think we are looking at a potential playoff stud down the stretch here. However, I'm with you both. I think Singletary, Jeff talked about the too high safety stuff. The Jets don't traditionally run a lot of that. They traditionally run a lot of cover 3. They run a lot of man stuff. And so that lends itself to Singletary maybe being more involved in the game script. And for what it's worth, with the Bills being large favorites, you would think that they would have to hand the ball off a lot. I think this game is going to be kind of tight, but not in one direction or another, where it's going to put your pass catching back on the field a little bit more. So yeah, I think Singletary this week is still the play.
Yep, completely agree. And I think that you guys pretty much said everything that I wanted to say. I was really touting James Cook this week, but I think that you guys said it best. You want to pick him up and hold on to him. If we see it happen again this week, then we've identified a trend, and then we're looking at a league-winning type of player down the stretch. But we haven't seen that just yet. But the writing is on the wall. The last thing I want to talk about in this game is kind of twofold here. Both Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox have been pretty boomer bust this week. So I'm wondering if there's anything in this matchup that you see as possibly being exploitable in the Jets secondary, or one of these guys could have a potential boom week. Christian, start us off here. Gabe Davis or Dawson Knox, are you liking any of them particularly in this matchup?
Like is a strong word, but I think if I'm going to take a shot on one or the other, it would be Knox. The Jets have given up multiple 4-catch or more performances to tight ends over the season, and they've been traditionally fairly good against tight ends because tight ends haven't scored touchdowns. But we know this Bills offense is fairly capable of scoring touchdowns, and so if Dawson Knox gets involved in the passing game, one of those 4 to 5 catches ends up in the end zone. We know what the landscape of tight ends is, and that's probably a top 6-ish week. And in terms of whether I'm taking a risk on starting that versus starting a wide receiver against this Jets secondary, I think I'd be more comfortable with the tight end.
Jeff, what do you think about this one? Are you thinking this could be a potential Gabe Davis boom week, or are you leaning towards Dawson Knox a little bit as well?
I'm not expecting boom out of this. The Jets defense is fantastic, and I think that's where I would really hesitate. I think what's happening, the Bills are putting Gabe Davis in an uncomfortable situation for him. I think he's a player that can stretch the field vertically, but they're asking him to do a lot more because they really lack that second traditional wide receiver too. So he doesn't have that in his game. But they had to learn. I think that it's the type of thing where the 4-touchdown game against the Chiefs end the season, they had to give him a shot to do that, and they're going to have to address that moving forward. So that's why that boomer bust nature, because he's a guy that he's not able to handle that high target volume. He's just not a refined receiver that can operate in that way. And occasionally he'll break off a touchdown and he'll be a worthwhile start. But yeah, that leads you to a lot of 7-8 targets, 2 or 3 catches, and 32 yards, and you're just kind of stuck there. And then Dawson Knox is a player that I expected big things out of him this year, and I'll wear that. I got it wrong because they gave him that big contract coming into the year, and he doesn't really leave the field. And so my expectation was that he would grow in comfort with Josh Allen, and they just haven't been using him at all. They've been leaving him in the block more, relying more on those wide receivers. That's kind of been Ken Dorsey's scheme, and that's kind of the way he's approached this. So I think the guy that, if you're looking for a deeper play in this game, Isaiah McKenzie probably would be the play even over these two. I tend to think, just because the nature of the Jets defense, and Christian hit it perfectly, where they like to play a lot of man. They like to play a lot of 3 corners deep. And sitting there working McKenzie underneath, especially with Josh Allen still kind of nursing that, is probably going to be a little bit of a plan of attack.
So let's play a quick, I like to call it Goldilocks. Are we too high, too low, or just right? Looking at consensus ranking right now on Gabe Davis, we're looking at wide receiver 25. Do you think that's about where he should be, or do you think that we're maybe a little bit too high or too low?
That's a little bit too high for me. I've got him just a little bit lower, just the nature of the boom bust.
All right, can't argue with anything there. Let's look at Dawson Knox though, because I'm wondering. I guess the question I should really be having is, rather than talking about rankings, because a lot of people that are listening to this, they aren't doing rankings. They're just saying, should I start this guy or not? So I guess the question is, does Dawson Knox fall inside the top 12 this week, or is he somebody that is probably just worth sitting on a bench or on a waiver wire?
I've got him at tight end 13 for me, so he's outside the top
So if
12.
somebody's rostering too, you're starting them.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, exactly. He's capable of catching a touchdown. We've seen that. So
Yeah, and that's tough. I mean, really, at the end of the day, unless you got those top 3 tight ends, which right now are Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and sheesh, I am drawing a blank right now. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and TJ Hawkinson. And I guess you can kind of throw Pat Fryermuth in that conversation as well. But if you don't have one of those guys, it's touchdown or bust for just about everybody else. But now it's time to jump into the sleeper start of the week. We do this every single week, and we just talk about some guys that we think you should be starting that we're a little bit higher on the consensus. This year, Sleeper added 22 new features. So if you haven't checked it out by now, be sure to do that. You can download Sleeper in the description below on YouTube or on podcast. Now let's go ahead and dive right in.
It's time for the Sleeper Start of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
Christian, start us off. Who is your sleeper start of the week?
Well, mine is kind of perfect because we just talked about this game, and Zonovan Knight is a guy that we've already talked about here, but I think that he's going to be a really fantastic start this week. He's had 2 weeks inside the top 24. He has a week inside the top 12 now, and the reports that he is going to have a prominent role, even with Michael Carter's return, lend me to believe that the Jets plan to use him. He has looked very explosive. He has looked very efficient on the ground. And while the Bills defense doesn't necessarily give you a lot of confidence that you can start a Jets running back, this Jets rushing attack is pretty dynamic. And I think that they're going to be able to move the ball fairly efficiently. Add in that I do believe that the Jets will keep this game close enough to keep Zonovan on the field. And I'm comfortable starting him as an RB2 this week.
All right. I don't want to push back too hard because I think you make some really strong points there. But I just wrote about this yesterday, actually, in our email newsletter. And I think where I'm at is just that I don't really have a strong take on the Jets backfield. And I think there's the opportunity for him to boom. But let me go ahead and read what I wrote. I said, after talking about Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, and Zonovan Knight, I ended it by saying this backfield is not for the faint of heart. Between Knight, Carter, and Johnson, it's doubtful that all will provide meaningful fantasy production, and it's tough to project how the early down work is going to be split between either Carter or Knight. They can both be phased out if the Bills go up big early. And really, that's all it is for me. It's not that I dislike any of these players. I think that from a pure talent standpoint, I think Zonovan Knight is the best back. He's looked fantastic over the last 2 weeks. But the thing that scares me is oftentimes we do see these backup running backs look really good in a relief role and then just lose their role as soon as that guy's healthy. Now, it's a little bit different because Michael Carter isn't the lead guy. He kind of was the de facto lead guy after Breece Hall got hurt. So I agree with everything you're saying. I think that he's looked great over the last 2 weeks. I'm just pumping the brakes a little bit just because I am not really sure. I mean, we're looking at Saleh, who comes from the Shanahan coaching tree, likes to really kind of go with that hot hand approach, but not even really a hot hand, just kind of nobody really knows what he's thinking approach. So I want to agree with you. I'm just this is one that is really throwing me for a loop, and it's not that I disagree. I just don't really have a strong take whatsoever on the Jets this week.
Well,
Yeah.
two's company, three's a crowd when it comes to backfields. I think two, you kind of have an idea of the roles, and you can kind of try to play that game script a little bit more. You get a three-headed backfield, and good luck. You're praying for a touchdown and 50 yards and hoping that you can walk out of there with 12 points.
Yeah, and like I said, Christian, I think you made a great point there, and I'm not trying to poke holes in your argument. I'm just saying that I am too scared to start any of these guys. So I think you make a great point, though, and if you got him, go ahead and plug him in. As a matter of fact, I actually am starting him in one league, but that's SFB 12, where I have just been destroyed by injuries, and it's a deep league, and sometimes you got to get a little bit desperate. So I'm hoping for it. But Jeff, same question to you: who is your sleeper start of the week for Week 14?
DJ Chark is my sleeper start of the week. He had a touchdown 2 weeks ago against the Buffalo. Last week against Jacksonville in a revenge game, he had 95 yards. Playing against the Vikings, I expect that game to go back and forth. Vikings have allowed the third most points to fantasy wide receivers this season, so I think Chark is a great play. I think that Jared Goff is feeling comfortable again now that Amon-Ra St. Brown is back, and now that Chark is in the lineup, and they're easing Jameson Williams in a little bit more there with TJ Hawkinson out of the lineup, taking that receiving threat out. Chark's really stepped forward over the last couple of weeks as being that second receiver behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I think that he can either get 100 yards or get loose and get you a touchdown. Either way in this matchup, I love this matchup up against the Vikings for him.
And again, I'm not trying to poke holes in your argument, just playing devil's advocate here a little bit. But Jameson Williams did come back last week, and we, didn't see much of anything at all from Jameson Williams. But eventually, we expect him to take over as that deep field threat, and he can do so much more than that. But I think that once Jameson Williams kind of gets up to speed 100%, it makes DJ Chark just kind of get pushed to the wayside a little bit. Based on what you're saying, because I think that what you're saying makes a ton of sense, that this game projecting to be a shootout, that they are going to take some of those shots deep. But do you think there's a chance that maybe they start to go Jameson Williams' way, or is he just not ready for that sort of role yet?
Until we see it, I am hesitant to say he's ready for it. Obviously, he's back and he's on the field, and I think that's important to get him those reps. But I don't know. I'm very skeptical that at any point this season we're going to see him emerge as a primary go-to receiver. I think the Lions are rightfully taking it a little bit slow with him. They're still a little ways back in the playoff race. And I think that it's, maybe if you get interesting in week 16, 17, and 18, maybe then they really start to ramp him up. But I don't expect it until we really see it. And I'm not there yet.
And I agree with you. I just wanted to open the conversation. And what I'll say to kind of back that up is look at DeAndre Swift. I mean, if you watch DeAndre Swift play for the last 7 or 8 weeks, he passed the eye test as being healthy. He still had his burst and had his speed and all that. And it took him how long to finally give him his full lion's share of the work back? So I think, if anything, just kind of looking at the coaching tendencies that we picked up from Detroit, they're going to take it as conservatively as possible with injury. So I agree with you. I do prefer Chark over Jameson Williams in this week, and I think he made a strong point there. Let's go ahead and talk about a different game, and Miami Dolphins playing against the Los Angeles Chargers. We've got one of the most overperforming teams in the Dolphins this year, facing off against what could, arguably be the most underperforming team, the 6-6 Los Angeles Chargers. And I want to talk about this backfield in Miami because it seemed like we stumbled upon a quote unquote league winner and Jeff Wilson. He got dropped when as soon as Chris McCaffrey joined San Francisco, and then all of a sudden he ended up in Miami, got into this lead role on an explosive offense, and it looked like he was going to be a set and forget RB1, RB2 type of player. But now Raheem Mostert suddenly took over again last week. So Christian, start us off here. Who are we starting? Are we starting Jeff Wilson, starting Raheem Mostert, both, neither, Myles Gaskin, Alec Engold? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I think your take on the Jets backfield is exactly how I feel about this Miami backfield. You talk about, and this is also
we'll just throw them all in there.
Right. Yeah, this is a Shanahan tree as well. And Mike McDaniel was actually the creator of that rushing attack, especially last year. I think we've learned now that he is kind of the mastermind behind that. And it seems like he's the guy that liked to keep people guessing on who is going to get the most of the work. So with Mostert looking fairly good at 2, I think Wilson, when they picked him up, I think it was mostly insurance for if Mostert couldn't stay healthy, because he has been hurt a little bit this year. And so I think that there was some insurance there, but we actually had proof in a McDaniel offense that he prefers Mostert over Wilson. We've seen that in the past. And so I think I was one that I jumped on Jeff Wilson, thought, well, yeah, I think he could be a league winner. The other side of this is that he could absolutely smash this week, be an RB1, but I don't know who to play from this backfield. So I would say I'm hesitant to start anyone. If you have to flex someone, I think I'd prefer Mostert at this point.
All right. And it's tough too, because now we're at that point in the season. If this was a few weeks ago, we'd be saying try to sell either of these guys, whether it's Jeff Wilson Jr. or Raheem Mostert, see what you can get on the trade market. But in most redraft leagues, trade deadlines are gone by now. So I don't know what you can really do, because I don't know if there's any point between now and the next few weeks. I mean, all we got left is 14, 15, 16, and 17. We got 4 weeks left in the season. I don't know if we're going to be able to identify any trends between now and then where you're going to feel comfortable plugging any of these guys in. So it seems like we're kind of at that point where if Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. are both healthy through the end of the season, they're both just going to be clogging up your bench without any real chance of getting into a lineup. Jeff, how are you feeling about this, though? Do you think that there is one guy that you can confidently start over the other?
I think they're both hurt, and that'll come as a major surprise at this time of the year in the NFL, but also with these backs that I think they're both injured. And I think that when you look at last week against San Francisco has been the best defense against running backs, like by a massive margin. They've just shut down the run game, and I think that McDaniel knew that going into the game. And so I think that Wilson picked up an injury in the Texans game, and kind of going into it, McDaniel knew that we're just not going to beat this team on the ground. We're going to have to beat this team throwing the football. And so I'm hesitant to take too much out of these short little spurts, because again, injuries, game script, some of it, that Texans game got wild. Mostert was sitting in that game, and then Wilson got dinged up, but they were winning 31-0 at halftime, and they called the dogs off on that one essentially. And again, game script against the 49ers. So like taking too much out of these last couple games, I think it's hard. But again, it's really, this is a new inserting Wilson into this lineup was a new thing at the deadline. And so you're just trying to find that clarity there. And that's certainly understandable. But I think whoever looks healthiest down the stretch is probably going to be the way that you're going to want to lean. And if Mostert gets back healthy, I do think that he's probably going to be the guy, but I think that they're probably comfortable using Wilson more in that goal line role. And so you're going to see a little bit of both of it. And it's kind of, chasing the big play with Mostert and a little bit of passing game involvement. Or are you going to grab the goal line with Wilson?
Yeah. So let me throw one other question out there, just to kind of put a bow on this conversation with Miami backfield. Prior to last week, which I think we can all agree was just a really weird game against San Francisco, where the Miami offense just wasn't looking right whatsoever. Jeff Wilson Jr. had seen 60 plus snaps in back-to-back weeks, and he was putting up really good fantasy numbers in both of those outings. So if we see this week, Jeff Wilson Jr. comes out, sees more than 60% of the snaps, and has another solid week, are you okay plugging him right back into your lineup in week 15 against the Bills?
You're asking the wrong guy here, because you're asking a zero RB advocate. And so if it's a guy in an offense with a pulse and he's going to get the ball, I'm plugging him into my lineups. But no, I mean, I'm not ranking him as he's certainly not a top 12 back, or even, I've got both of them sitting outside of the top 24, even in this shortened bye week, just because we don't know exactly which direction to go. But, if you need that running back spot, and if you're somebody that builds your lineups like I do, then you probably do. I'd still put him in there.
Yeah, so apologies to all of you Jeff Wilson Jr. rosters out there. You thought you stumbled into gold a couple of weeks ago, and just more Shanahanigans, this time coming from Mike McDaniel. Now, last thing we'll talk about with the Dolphins is Tua Tagovailoa. And if you guys want to shred me for asking this question, go right ahead, because I asked the same question last week, and Andy Behrens absolutely shredded it for me. And anybody that's watched this show knows that I have a little bit of a bias against Tua. I think that he has been, outplaying his skill level a little bit this season. But really his overall production has been supported by that week. What was it? Week 8, I believe. No, week 2, where he boomed for like 50 something points in fantasy. And then weeks 8 through 10, he had a couple soft opponents and had some nice, some nice outings there. But outside of those 4 games, he's kind of been a liability in fantasy lineups. So are we looking at him as a top 5 option this week, or do we think that this overall season-long production might be a little bit fraudulent just based on a couple boom games here? Christian, start us off. How are we feeling about Tua?
I think the variable that matters a whole lot is Jalen Waddle, because the Miami offense looked okay last week. until Jalen Waddle went down. I wouldn't say it looked great, but it didn't look as bad as it did when Waddle left the game, right? So Waddle was limited at practice. It seems like he may be able to go this week, but I think we kind of know Tua's success is very much so on the back of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle being outstanding and just mismatches across the field. I think if Waddle sits, that's where I'm a little hesitant. But on the other side of things, the Chargers do give up the 13th most points to opposing quarterbacks. They're not a scary matchup by any means. And with this Miami offense, I think after that San Francisco game, this is the game that Mike McDaniel reaches into his bag and says, I need to get my quarterback right because we are heading to the playoffs and I need him to be supremely confident. We've seen a lot of those narratives throughout the year about how he has kind of hyped Tua up and made him believe how great he is. And I think that the offense is going to reflect that this week. So I'm pretty confident starting him as a top 8 option. Reaching that top 5, though, that's where like Waddle definitely matters.
Yeah, and I think I think you nailed that perfectly. How much the coach has made an impact on him, because when you looked at Tua last year, he looked like a broken man. And I'm not trying to get inside like the head of an NFL player here, but you could just see it in his body language, like shoulders slumped over, looking down at his feet, like he just looked downtrodden. And this year, he's got this little swagger and cockiness. I mean, it's a very, very different person than we saw last year. I do like the call out with Waddle as well. So let's play a little, Tua or this guy, and both of you guys can play along here. So let's say somebody's torn between Tua Tagovailoa and Kyler Murray going up against the Patriots this week. Christian, who would you prefer between those two?
Tua.
Jeff,
Same.
how about you? Tua or Kyler?
Same. I love that matchup against the Chargers, and that really plays a lot of it.
How about Dak Prescott or Tua and going up against Houston?
I have Tua.
I also would have Tua. You run the risk of Dak sitting in the second half with the Cowboys being that much better. So I think that factors in as well.
And even if he plays the whole game, his role might just be turning around and giving the ball to Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. He might not have to throw that much. So I'm with you on that one. But let me throw one more out there, and it is the guy playing on the opposite side of the field, Justin Herbert or Tua Tagovailoa. Who do you prefer this week?
Herbert.
I have Herbert ranked higher too.
All right. Well, I was hoping for some fun discourse here where we can all argue a little bit, but here we are in lockstep on every single one. So on to the next question. And I already hinted about it a little bit, but on the other side of the field, playing against the Los Angeles Chargers. And let's talk about Mike Williams, because he is back at practice now and suddenly trending to play this week, which I don't think anybody had really expected. So, Jeff, if Mike Williams is active, are you starting him?
If you're desperate enough, I think he's naturally a boom bust player. Anyways, I do like the matchup against Miami, but I think Josh Palmer, and you gotta give Christian credit. Christian was hammering Josh Palmer this summer, and he was one of the few that were really on there. He really hit it, and I think that's something that he deserves a lot of credit for. But Palmer has really taken a step forward as a really that third receiver in this offense. And so I even with Mike Williams back on the field, I don't think Palmer's going away. I think Palmer's going to still be involved. I don't think he's the type of player that he just played only because of injury. Now he's brought his game up to that level that they have to see him as a foundational piece moving forward in this offense. And so that's where I would enter some hesitation on Mike Williams, but it really comes down to what are your options, what are you playing, and that 6 teams. We're going to keep talking about it this week, but 6 teams on a bye forces your hand on some things.
Yeah. And I think that you're spot on with Josh Palmer too. I think regardless of whether Keenan Allen or Mike Williams are healthy, I think that he has done enough to carve out a role for himself. It seems like DeAndre Carter is the guy who's kind of, his production is predicated on what Mike Williams is going to do. And I think if Mike Williams is inactive, then you can get excited about DeAndre Carter. And if he is active, then you expect nothing from him. But Josh Palmer has done more than enough that it doesn't matter. I mean, we saw one of his best games of the season was when Keenan Allen and Mike Williams returned, and Josh Palmer had a great week. So, Christian, I do remember you talking about that this offseason, and I, props to you because that was a great call on Josh Palmer. But same question to you, Christian, real quickly. Are you starting Mike Williams if he's healthy?
Well, first of all, thank you guys. I didn't expect both Keenan and Mike Williams to get hurt, though, so it kind of worked out in my favor there. But I think where I hesitate on Mike Williams, especially the Dolphins matchup at face value looks pretty good. And then you remember that Xavier Howard has kind of turned it on over the last couple of weeks. And I get a little nervous about that matchup with him coming off with, it's an ankle injury, and that's an injury that can affect your explosiveness and can affect your ability to win on routes downfield. Add in that Josh Palmer has carved out a really great role that has kind of elevated this offense. Now, Keenan Allen coming back has definitely made it look a little bit better, and Mike Williams being on the field, that's kind of like the final piece, but I don't know if we see that come to fruition just yet. And we have to remember now, Mike Williams was limited and then full as his practice trend, so it sounds like he will definitely play. But that it could be a pitch count type of thing too, because the last time he tried to return, he re-injured. So I think I'd hesitate, but again, 6 teams on bye. I think there are certain teams that have to play him because he's probably better than other options. Jeff, I wanted to ask you, would you play DJ Chark or Mike Williams?
I would play Chark over Mike Williams this week.
Really?
Okay.
I mean, definitely a better game script and implied total. So I get it, but it's kind of crazy to think about that. And anybody that rosters Mike Williams just knows. I mean, this guy, not only is he injury prone, but every single time he makes a catch, like I don't think I've ever seen him just catch the ball, land on his feet, and run. Like this guy is putting his body on the line for every single catch. And we saw it when he re-injured himself. It was on his first catch of the game. He jumped up, laid out, and was slow to get up. So yeah, there's definitely risk of injury re-aggravation if you start him this week, but there's also the upside that it's Mike Williams and he can go off for 3 touchdowns on any given week. So very interesting boom or bust flex option. I think that really he's one of those guys that you can't just say, he's a top 36 wide receiver. I think it comes down to what are you looking for in your lineup? Because if you need a solid floor, there are probably 50 better options out there. But if you need a swing for the fences, Hail Mary type of player, Mike Williams still possesses that upside, even if he is on a snap count this week. But we should get some more clarity after Friday's practice, so be sure to check that out. If he's able to log back-to-back full practices at the end of the week, that probably bodes well for his availability. But again, just something to keep an eye on Friday afternoon. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions. And it seems like somehow we've brought up this game when talking about every other game. Somehow we have looped back to this one, and it's going to be a fun one. I think last I saw the over-under on this game was 53.5. Somehow the Lions opened up as favorites, and then the line has just continued to move in their direction despite the Vikings being 10-2. But right now the Lions are red hot, so you can't really argue it. But we got word that Irv Smith could be returning, if not this week, highly unlikely, but by the end of the year. So let's talk a little bit about TJ Hawkinson, who has really been a fantasy football darling since this trade to Minnesota. He's been as steady as they come. I think you put him in a tier by himself, right below Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. If Irv Smith comes back, though, sometime between week 17 or before week 17, does that cap the upside for Hawkinson? Jeff, what do you think?
No. Are we sure Irv Smith's good at football? I mean,
I've been hearing it for years, so it must be true.
Yeah. I don't know. People took him in their dynasty drafts and they were excited about him. But no, I think that move for Hawkinson says pretty clearly what the Vikings think about Irv Smith and moving forward in his role within that organization. This is Hawkinson's team now, and he's going to be that tight end. He's going to be that secondary option behind Justin Jefferson. And maybe Irv might vulture a goal line, but they like to use 2 tight ends in Minnesota, and they've kind of been rotating some other guys through there, and Nick Munn and cavalcade of guys that aren't going to get you super very excited. But I think Irv will take those, but I don't expect any sort of real knock on Hawkinson's production from Irv Smith. And I think that they kind of gave up on him on making that move to get TJ Hawkinson.
Christian, I saw you nodding during everything Jeff was saying. If you got something to add, you can, but I think we're all in agreement here, right? This is one of those questions for the audience. Don't worry. TJ Hawkinson is fine. Don't ever think about benching him. This offense is tailor-made for him. He is getting a ton of plays schemed up to get him the ball where he's the primary read on almost 20% of their plays. So I think we're all in agreement here. Just keep starting TJ Hawkinson, regardless of what happens with Irv Smith. Now, the other question I have is with the quarterbacks here, and I think this is kind of an interesting question. Originally, when I wrote this up, Kirk Cousins' consensus ranking was at QB 13. He has since moved into the top 12. So I'm going to change up the question a little bit on the fly here, and I hope you guys don't mind. But the question for me isn't if Kirk Cousins is going to be a top 12 guy. It's, do you prefer Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff in this matchup? Christian, what do you think?
Yeah, it's Goff pretty easily for me. Kirk Cousins, while his season-long statistics look pretty good, I think he's sitting at QB 13, somewhere around there, depending on your scoring, of course. But He has not looked good over the last few weeks, and this was supposed to be the time that he was kind of really getting control of this offense. He's been erratic. He kind of looks, I don't want to speculate, but he looks hurt to me. He doesn't have the same zip that he normally does. Something's a little bit off with Kirk Cousins. And on the other side of things, Jared Goff has complete control of the Detroit Lions offense. And that thing is humming. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown back healthy. You've got Jameson Williams now being introduced to the offense, which I think adds a completely different dynamic. Jared Goff might underthrow him a few times, but it shouldn't impact his fantasy score too much. And honestly, these are two terrible secondaries, and I would rather bank on the Lions' offensive attack, their passing attack being more stable than the Vikings, especially with Dalvin Cook having a couple good weeks here over the last few. So.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. It's ever since Kirk Cousins, ever since he put those chains on his on and started dancing on the plane, it's just been downhill ever since. So, Jeff, again, I saw you nodding. Are you in the camp as well that you prefer Jared Goff to Kirk Cousins this week?
I do. I have Goff over him. Cousins going back to Buffalo. He's quarterback 16, quarterback 29, quarterback 9 against New England on Thanksgiving night, and then quarterback 25 last week. So, I mean, he's really not even finishing in the back half of those quarterback 2 rankings the last couple of weeks. And he had 357 yards against the Bills and still finished as quarterback 16, which tells you that, you're not getting the rushing floor out of him, and he's not being as productive in the red zone as you would like to see. So he makes it a difficult start. I do expect this game to go back and forth. And so I've still got Cousins right on the fringe there of being a quarterback 1, but I do have Goff in front. Goff, Christian hit it perfectly. Goff is playing very, very well right now.
And just pure gutalytics here. We've been playing fantasy football for a long time. We know how it goes. Every single time Kirk Cousins has the stage set where he's got, a cake matchup and he's going to smash, and everybody says this is the week that you confidently plug Kirk Cousins in. So he goes for like 3 picks and 120 yards. So, I mean, it's just like we've been playing this game long enough. We know what Kirk Cousins does. It's not a primetime game, but it's just when these games are set up for him to smash, it seems like he always comes up short of expectations. So just on that alone, I am going to prefer Jared Goff right here. They're only separated by less than half a point per game over the course of the season in what they're putting up fantasy production wise. So right now you've got Goff trending up and you've got Cousins trending down. I'm with both of you. I think that Goff is the guy to play over Kirk Cousins this week. Now, let's talk about Detroit a little bit more, and I want to look at DeAndre Swift here, who started off the season red hot, looked like he was going to be an elite RB1, picked up an ankle injury, and then it has just been a headache ever since. But last week, he was off the injury report, looked like he was healthy, and had a great week. And then he was on the injury report yesterday, off the injury report today. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? But let's just talk about this a little bit with DeAndre Swift. Is he the lead back, or is it Jamal Williams? Who do you prefer this week? Jeff, start us off.
Well, Dan Campbell came from New Orleans where they had Alvin Kamara and they had Mark Ingram. And I think that you get a lot of that in the Detroit offense between Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. And I think that this might have been a case where they were sitting. What did they get to? It was 2-6, or were they 1-6 at one point in time? And I think that they were there, and I think it was kind of looked at maybe as a lost season and trying to get Swift through the season. And then they got hot. They started winning, and Swift got a little bit healthier. And Swift is the real. Amon-Ra St. Brown's the engine of this offense, but Swift is the real complement there. And so I think that you're running into a case where now he's feeling better and they're feeling like they're playing in more important games. And so they're willing to give him a little bit longer leash than what they had for a little bit going on there. And that's kind of a lot of it.
I have heard so much discourse on the Lions this week, and you're the first person to actually mention that, Jeff. I haven't heard anybody say that. This went from being a lost season at the season's halfway point to suddenly the Lions in the playoff hunt. So that's a great take that I haven't heard anybody talk about yet. So I'm with you on there. So do you think Swift is the guy ahead of Jamal Williams? Is that how you have him ranked this week?
This week I do. In PPR formats, I've got Swift. I got Swift as a running back 12 in half PPR, what we do for ECR. So I'm a little bit more aggressive on him there. Just those PPR formats I think play very well to him. And again, I expect this game to be a back and forth game.
Love it. Christian, what is your take on DeAndre Swift this week? Do you think that he is taking over the backfield again?
I don't think he's necessarily taking over the backfield, but I do think that they are actively getting him touches and actively involving him. I still think Jamal Williams is the goal line back in most scenarios. Last week, DeAndre Swift got so close to scoring a touchdown that I think they rewarded him and left him in there and let him get that push the ball through. And I think that meant a lot to him. You could tell how bad he wanted that. So I think that we will see a little bit better touchdown production from him, whether it's through the air or not. They get really creative around the goal line as well. So I know, Jamal Williams probably going to run in 3 touchdowns in this game because this is going to be a high scoring game. But I think Swift is going to be very active and involved. I kind of prefer them both. I would be very comfortable starting both of them. But if I had to choose between the two, I would roll Swift for the pass catching upside.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that both of these guys are top 15 running backs this week in what projects to be a shootout. And then we didn't even mention Dalvin Cook's name once talking about this game, but Dalvin Cook falls in as my RB5 this week. This game should have a ton of fireworks. Two very bad defenses, high power offenses playing indoors, two teams that are familiar with each other. So stage is set for some fireworks this week. I'm excited for it. Let's talk about one more game before we sign off here, though. And I want to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers facing off against the Brock Purdy-led San Francisco 49ers. And I just want to have a conversation. A lot of what we do on this show is talking about matchups and rankings, but I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about dynasty for a second. And of course, I'm talking about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Obviously, the age is in Chris Godwin's favor, but if you look at the historical production, it leans towards Mike Evans. So, Christian, Jeff, both of you guys are big into dynasty. Let's talk through this one a little bit. Start us off, Christian. Who do you prefer, Mike Evans or Chris Godwin?
I think it's Godwin, and there are a few different reasons. Obviously, the age plays a role in that. He's 2.5 years younger than Mike Evans, and really, once receivers hit that 28 years old mark, that's when you start to see a decline in production. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to everybody. Mike Evans has actually continued to produce, and he's past that age. But I think there's a piece of it where Chris Godwin is also more sustainable if they were to go to a younger quarterback or maybe a not Tom Brady quarterback, whoever that may be. Mike Evans very much so relies on a good deep ball thrower, and he kind of always has. And that's why, Jameis Winston, he put up a lot of stats. He threw a lot of deep balls to Mike Evans. That's how he wins. Chris Godwin, however, is that possession guy. He wins from the slot. He can still win from the outside. I think he's the more complete receiver, and I honestly think Chris Godwin is the most talented receiver that they have. And so I would lean in that direction, knowing that we don't know when Brady's going to be done. And if that's the case, we may see Evans move on. We may see a situation where Godwin is left to be that safety outlet for someone new. And even if Brady is there for 2 more years, Godwin has been his preferred target a lot of his time with Tampa Bay. So I lean Godwin in this scenario.
Yeah, agree with everything you say there. And it's just been weird. I don't really understand what's happening because Brady and Evans have displayed incredible chemistry with each other for 2 years. And this year, they just can't figure it out. Either Brady's missing the throws or he's putting them right into Evans's hand and he's dropping them. They just, I don't understand what happened, but that chemistry that we saw for 2 straight years has just completely been thrown out the window. So, Jeff, kind of same question to you here. Who do you prefer? Is it Evans or Godwin? And we're good enough friends. I know your answer, but let's hear it.
It's definitely Godwin on this one. And I think Christian made great points there on, we don't know who the next quarterback's going to be. And we don't know if they're going to have a quarterback that's able to attack vertically. And that could be a major question. And Mike Evans is going to be 30 years old. And while I feel like Mike Evans has an age profile that we feel comfortable with him aging a little bit, but we might see the effects right now. Like that might be the thing that we're talking about, not being able to get on the same page. You might have a 29-year-old guy that came into the league pretty young when he came into the league, and he's played a lot of football. And receivers kind of, you start to see those little bit of dips, and then it's like that off the cliff. They're just completely done. And I think that Evans, he might be there. And I think that too, you got to factor in how much football he's played. He's played a lot of football. He hasn't missed any of those injury seasons, and I believe he was maybe 20 years old when he came into the league, but I know he was younger when he came into the league as Johnny Manziel's main target at Texas A&M there. But it's just mileage, I think, is a lot of it's on that, and you start to see those little things with wide receivers when they get older, and then all of a sudden they're just not separating at all, and they're just not producing anymore. Whereas Godwin coming back off the injury, it's clear that he's taken over as the primary receiver in Tampa over the last couple of weeks again.
So are we at Mike Evans for a second round rookie pick yet? Is that where we're at now? If you can get a second, are you trying to salvage for that low, or do you think it's still worth to hold on and hope that he can recoup some of the value at this point?
I'm not going that low yet, and not doing the second yet, but I did in a league. So I had you guys should know by now, but I don't mess around with age in Dynasty, and I get out when I can get out. And I was in a league. I had Mike Evans in, and I did a trade. I used him. I used some of the hype off Miles Sanders, and I turned it into Drake London. A couple weeks ago when everybody was kind of down on Drake London. So Christian knows I'm always hustling when it comes to the dynasty leagues, but I don't mess around with age, and that's the guy that I got out of.
Yeah, Jeff and I made a trade last week that blew my mind because I was actually able to offload. Was it James Conner and Zeke? I believe it was a
You
couple
got
older
James
guys.
Conner, Zeke, and Donta Foreman, and I gave you a mid-second because that league I needed backs.
It's
in
an
that league,
insane league too. It's a double
Well-
tight end premium, and yeah.
well, you get points per carries in that league too, and so I had been kind of skating a by through that league, but I'm the defending champ in that league, and I knew I needed to load up some running backs. Our guy Herms has a killer squad, and he's been rolling through everybody, and so I had to get some more backs in there. And I love Connor moving forward, and Zeke has been he's been an RB1 over the past month, and so that was just a situation where pushing for a title and willing to give up that mid-second to kind of load up there a little bit.
As many leagues as I've played in with you, I never thought that I would see except an incoming trade with James Conner and Zeke Elliott. But hey, you got to play the cards, and you're contending right now. So best of luck in that league. I will be hoping for a high draft pick in the 2023 rookie picks. But let's stick with this game though, talking about the Bucs a little bit, and Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White. Have you noticed a theme in the show that we're having today? I mean, we're talking about all these backfields that we really don't know what to make sense of, whether it's Detroit or the Jets or the Dolphins, and now here we are talking about the Bucs. I mean, it was kind of bizarre. I'm sure you guys saw that little clip from the game where Leonard Fournette was in the huddle on the final play of the game, and Tom Brady substituted Leonard Fournette out and brought Rachaad White in. I mean, that says 1,000 words right there. We can talk about that for quite a bit. But Christian, I'm going to give you the floor first because this offseason, you and I had some very spirited Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White debates. I was on the Leonard Fournette side. You were on the Rachaad White side. It might have taken 14 weeks, but it's looking like you could have been right on this one. So talk to us a little bit. Is Rachaad White fully taking over the backfield?
He has until he makes mistakes. And I think it's worth noting that if you look at the snap shares from last week, yes, that is still in Leonard Fournette's favor because Rachaad White had a pretty crucial fumble in a game that they were losing the entire time. Mistakes like that don't really fly with Tom Brady-led offenses. I assume that he didn't want Rachaad on the field immediately after, but it's also worth noting Rachaad White started this game. Rachaad White was given every opportunity to get the rushing attack going. He couldn't do that. Fournette actually was the better type of runner. And I think what we might see down the stretch is a kind of dual-headed thing where if we're looking at a team that we need to run inside, we need inside the tackles, I think Leonard Fournette might get a few more carries than maybe we would prefer if we're managers of Rachaad White. But the high value touches are still going to Rachaad White. And like you said, Tom Brady wanted him to catch that pass because Leonard Fournette has shown that he can't always do that. But Fournette was effective in the passing game in this game as well. So I think it's worth noting that we may have a little bit more ambiguity on this backfield on a week-to-week basis.
And I dare I say, I mean, is it kind of reminiscent of the Detroit backfield where you can kind of say Rachaad White is DeAndre Swift and Leonard Fournette is Jamal Williams, where, I mean, it's almost too perfect to say that those are the kind of the roles that they're playing here. So like you said, Leonard Fournette may have had more touches and may have had more snaps, but the high value touches, which are what we really care about in fantasy, are almost all going to Rachaad White. So I'm with you, trying to adjust priors and, change my stance as more information becomes available. But it certainly looks like Rachaad White is the guy to start ranking ahead of Leonard Fournette. Jeff, do you agree with all that?
I do. I've had White ahead of Fournette the last couple of weeks in my rankings, anyways. I do think the one thing, it's Tom Brady, and so I think Christian made a good point there on mistakes. And if Rashard White is making mistakes in blitz pickup or whatever it might be, Brady's not going to mess around, and he's going to put Fournette back in there. And I think that he likes to have that passing complement, and he likes to have that passing back. And White is clearly the better passing back, and Fournette's capable there, but White is a special player in that aspect of the game. But I think if it comes down to it, and Brady needs that protector back there, then it probably might swing back to Fournette.
So we talked about this. We opened the mailbag show with it yesterday, and I'm sure if you guys have done any guest spots this week, you've probably talked about it. You're probably going to talk about it later tonight on the Audible. You'll probably talk about it in SiriusXM later tonight. But we need to talk about the San Francisco 49ers, and I guess the question is, who is the biggest beneficiary right now with Brock Purdy taking over as quarterback? And kind of a two-part question here. Who's the biggest beneficiary, and who takes the biggest negative hit? Jeff, start us off.
Biggest beneficiary is Christian McCaffrey. I think that we saw the passing game usage that we'd wanted to see. Brock Purdy's not going to attack vertically, and they're going to keep things very, very simple for Brock Purdy. So I think Christian McCaffrey is a big beneficiary, and probably because Christian McCaffrey is a big beneficiary, Deebo Samuel, it probably plays into it too, because wanting to keep McCaffrey fresh. But I expect reliance on the short passing game, keeping it simple, getting the ball in your great. These guys are great after the catch, and so that's what's going to rely on Purdy, I think, there.
I mean, that's pretty much word for word what I said yesterday in the mailbag show, that CMC and Deebo are the beneficiaries. So I guess the question to you then, Christian, who do you think takes the biggest negative impact?
It's tough to say that it could be Kittle because I don't think he's had a huge positive impact anyway. I think that would be my choice. I think Jimmy G definitely previously had favored going to Kittle. I don't necessarily think Ayuk takes a big hit. I think kind of where I'm going with this is I don't necessarily think that there will be a big hit, because I think the Shanahan offense is very, very translatable from quarterback to quarterback, and we've kind of seen proof of that over the last few years. I think we would have seen proof of that had Trey Lance, stayed healthy, and unfortunately they didn't go down that path. But I would say Kittle, it's kind of a cop out. Ayuk, technically, because he does work downfield a little bit more, but I do expect that they're going to score some touchdowns, and Ayuk, I think he'll be a favored target in the red zone. So,
and the thing with Ayuk, you don't have to be a hyperactive quarterback. It's not like you need to hit him in these tight windows. Like, this dude is on an island. Like, he just shakes every defender out of his boots. He is wide open almost every single time he draws a target. So you don't have to be the most accurate quarterback in the world when your wide receiver doesn't have anybody within 10 yards of him. And that's kind of what Ayuk has done this entire season. So I agree with you a little bit there. But let's talk about George Kittle, because like you said, he hasn't had much of a positive impact this season. And now looking at the change to quarterback, it could negatively impact him even more. So the question I have is, who do you have ranked ahead of George Kittle this week? Because, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, I think you make the argument that he's almost outside of the top 10 if you're willing to push it that far. So let me do this. I'll start reading down through consensus, the rankings. You let me know when to stop. Obviously, Travis Kelce at the top. We're not doing that. Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Schultz, Greg Dulcich, Gerald Everett.
Right there.
Foster Moreau.
Oh, yeah, right there.
Yeah, so we're both we're all in the same spot, and that's exactly where I have it too. I have him sandwiched in between Gerald Everett and Foster Moreau in my rankings. It's kind of unfortunate, because if you wanted George Kittle, you were drafting him as the tight end 3 off the board. You probably paid a 4th or a 5th round pick for him, but he just isn't that premium tight end. He is a touchdown or bust tight end at this point. We just have to kind of live with that. Well, fellas, we are out of time, but had a great show here today. Before we log off, Christian, let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
At C Williams NFL on Twitter, and that's where I reside. So don't try to find me on any other socials. Jeff,
let everyone know where they can find you.
For whom J Bell tolls. That's going to be me everywhere that you go. So the number 4, whom J Bell tolls. You can find me on Twitter there. You can find me in the Footballguys Discord. I need to get back to answering some questions there, and just around wherever.
And which one of you is going to plug the college football show? Because I already did start the show, but why doesn't one of you let everyone know, where they can find it, what time it airs, and all that fun stuff?
So I think we maybe have an announcement at this point, and I know Dave is holding down Wednesday nights at 7:30 with the Mailbag Show, but I think that you can expect to see following that the College Football Show. We're going to go back live, and if you follow the Debbie Royale, we were live on Tuesday nights at 9:30. Well, we're going to have a new night. We're going to be Wednesday night, and we're going to be maybe at 9:30. We're not quite sure, narrowed down quite yet, but we're going to go live, and so join in, and we'll be talking about college football. And we'd love to get that interaction back that we had a little bit when we were with the Debbie Royale. But Tuesday nights, Wednesday night, and then you find us in your podcast and wherever else you find us. So the College Football Show for Football Guys.
Yeah, if you're looking to get an edge in your dynasty leagues, I don't know why you're going to wait until April to start studying up on these rookies. These guys that I'm talking with right now, they have been doing it since last year already. So if you want an edge in your rookie drafts, be sure to check that out Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Absolutely awesome show. And of course, I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. But most importantly, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys so you can see all of the video content that we have to offer here. Not only do we have the Launchpad and the College Football Show, but we also have the Audible, the Dynasty Show, the Dynasty Newsletter, DFS Power Grid. We got the short videos that we're bringing to you every single day and so much more at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video because that's going to help some other people find it. And if you got anything to add, go ahead and leave a comment right below. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. And like I said, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.